Welcome back to On Texas Football. I'm Jeff Howe, joined by Rod Babers and CJ Vogel. We're going to talk about the guys on the Texas defense who could benefit the most from the Will Muschamp hire. We'll tell you more about our sponsor for this edition of On Texas Football here in a little bit. That's our friends over at South Point Dodge. I want to thank them for sponsoring this episode. But Rod, I'll start with you because I don't think it's any coincidence that during the press conference on Friday, Steve Sarkisian went out of his way to say Colin Simmons is a really good fit for the Buck linebacker and Will Muschamp's defense. Well, I think we can all agree with that. You were a part with Bobby and Jerry on the Friday live stream interviewing Sergio Kendall, and when you think about the Buck linebacker and Muschamp's defense, he was a pretty good one. I got to think that part of the reason it's kind of one of those maybe unintended consequences for Sark, as he would put it. Getting the most out of Colin Simmons, Rod, is every bit to me as important as when we talk about getting the most out of Arch Manning in 2026, and you hire Will Muschamp to help facilitate that.
Yeah, we talk about the all-in for Arch a lot this offseason. At least we've brought it up a ton. You know, Colin Simmons is also one of those rare talents who's going to be a top 15, top 10 pick. Muschamp is one of those defensive minds that specializes in weaponizing certain players. And because of the uber aggressive style and uber aggressive philosophy he has, I mean, he's got those guys on attack constantly. Right? What's the great line that we used to throw out there in Longhorn Blitz, Jeff? Thoroughbreds don't go backwards.
Yeah, you don't train them to run back.
Yeah. And he gonna see Colin Simmons as a thoroughbred, and he's gonna have that guy in attack mode. So in addition to Colin Simmons being a guy that can get double-digit sacks in any system out there, you put him out there, it really don't matter. Slow start, he can get double-digit sacks. With now Muschamp, I think you'll get someone who can scheme him up. And that's, Brent Venables is actually really good at this. But, we talk about that with Sark all the time, scheming guys open. Well, how about that with a defender, with a disruptor? Can you scheme him to havoc? Scheme him to play a matchup advantage? And that's what Muschamp does really well, too. And with that buck, you move that guy around. He's a movable chess piece. And Colin Simmons already, even with PK a little bit, has been moved around, probably more than Longhorn fans would like, actually. But that is one of the keys to that buck linebacker is a guy you can put him in different situations to find matchup advantages.
CJ, this to me is kind of like a more souped up version of what we saw going from 2019 to 2020. And like when I think of the guys Will Muschamp had as edge rushers, his first go around in Texas, like Sergio Kendall was a just phenomenal athlete who kind of had to learn how to be a pass rusher. Colin Simmons is a great edge player right now, who he is athletic, but he just got a natural feel for getting after the quarterback. And CJ, Rod mentioned in the coverage issues, I've talked a lot about it. I didn't like it when Manny Diaz did it with Alex Okafor in 2011, 2012. I didn't like it when Todd Orlando did it with Joseph Osai. And CJ, we never really got to see it in that 2020 season because it was truncated and there was no non-conference schedule. But this could be a better version of Chris Ash coming in, taking Joseph Osai and saying, no, I'm not dropping him 20 yards into coverage. On third down, I want him getting after the quarterback, and Joseph Osai ended up being an All-American.
Yeah, it's funny how that works, right? When you put players in their best position to ultimately succeed. Another name that comes to mind in that regard, Jeff, is Malcolm Roach at times at 285, 300 pounds, however big he was, even dropped back into coverage back in the day. And I'm sitting there saying, wait a minute, he's pretty good going forward. So Colin Simmons, look, I think one thing, for Muschamp is he's getting an All-American level player already. Right, you don't have to mold and build from the start. I think Alan Clark has done a tremendous job already, right? And of course, yeah. Colin Simmons in his own right is very talented. So it's all about taking it to the next level. How can you weaponize an already All-American level player? That to me is moving around the line of scrimmage. That is coming from a second level, perhaps, and just finding different matchups rather than, hey, go line up as a 7 or 9 technique and get after the quarterback. No, it's different, right? And it's the way that we scheme wide receivers open on the offensive side of the ball. You can scheme favorable matchups or different looks for edge rushers or your best pass rushers. That's what I'm hoping to see under Will Muschamp.
Yeah. Rod, Will Muschamp, obviously, he can scheme edge rushers to get to the quarterback like you talked about. His specialty, though, where he really thrives, and you can look at his time here at Texas, go back and look at his time at LSU, even at Florida, South Carolina, and his last stint at Georgia. Defensive backs benefit a lot from playing with Will Muschamp because that's the position he tends to work with. And, think about a guy like Malachi Starks, who he had at Georgia. Some of his safeties at South Carolina were really good. And I think back to the first one at Texas, the way he was able to weaponize Earl Thomas, the way he was able to weaponize a guy like Aaron Williams, like got him in the nickel early on, and he became an NFL caliber corner. If Jelani McDonald decides to come back, Rod, we've talked about, hey, how can you weaponize him? What kind of things can you do with him? I would love to see what Jelani McDonald can do in a Will Muschamp defense.
Yeah, the versatility, right? I mean, I would say this is something that, PK started to really prioritize, and I think it's something from really Sark's mindset. They really started to prioritize, versatility, position flex, especially on the back end and defense backfield, cross-training guys in the back seven to offer you solutions or create solutions for a lot of different problems. And honestly, for Will Muschamp, he's going to benefit from that. A guy like Jelani McDonald, he's the ultimate chess piece, right? You can move him around the chessboard, do different things with him. You can put him on the line of scrimmage. You can use him as an extra linebacker. You can drop him back into coverage. So I think ultimately, because of that versatility, that position flex, not only something that Sark wants to, I think, weaponize, but that's something in Muschamp's defense that's going to give you a lot of different solutions. It's going to give you a lot of different possibilities, the way you want to present the back end and the way you want to disguise different coverages. And that's what Muschamp is really good at too. Not that PK wasn't trying to, but I think PK was a little bit more rudimentary in his disguise on the back end. You're going to get sophisticated disguise. You're going to almost kind of NFL caliber disguise on the back end now, from pre-snap to post-snap. Guy like Jelani McDonald, who can actually be a force run defender at the second level, and a guy who actually can be a plus coverage defender for you in the back end. You can do all types of stuff with that guy. So I honestly, if you look at it, he might be one of the guys, if you look at it in terms of positions where he's going to line up all throughout the season, he may have the most variety in where he lines up in a Muschamp defense throughout the season when you look at the back end and the front end and what you can do with them.
Yeah. CJ, when you talk about the regulars on this defense, guys that were starting caliber players, the only other guy that to me that I would mention is Anthony Smith. And just because, look, you're going to need, we'll see what they do at linebacker in the portal. And that's another really good thing I think about getting Will Muschamp in now is he can take stock of those linebackers. He can get with Brandon Harris and the player personnel staff and figure out, try to work the board and figure out, okay, who might be in the portal? What do we need a linebacker? But there's going to be a lot on Anthony Smith. And CJ, you've seen Tyler Atkinson.
Yes.
We look at Anthony Hill, the role he played as a freshman. But I think we got to remember, too, he came into a linebacker room where you had Jalen Ford and David Bender, who had played a ton of football by the time he got there. You don't really have that. To me, there's just going to be a lot. It's a big offseason for Anthony Smith to kind of all of a sudden, he's the oldest guy in that room. You got to kind of be the heartbeat of that defense.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot from a leadership perspective as well as developmental. And look, for whatever's left of his development, I think we're all excited because what we saw in the second half of the season this year, you sit around and you say, oh, he's a heck of a player. Like, you see why the nickname Hurricane stuck around with him. He just creates havoc. He destroys what's in front of him. And that's what I've grown to love about Anthony Smith. The instincts are something that I think Will Muschamp is going to have a field day with. Anthony Smith, for all bits and pieces that we watched this year of this team, probably has the first initial step, the fastest initial step of any linebacker that we saw in the direction of where the ball is going. And I'm saying that as someone who loves Anthony Hill. I think the instincts in reading what's in front of him for Smith is just a little bit quicker and maybe a better athlete. But altogether, you get that fastest initial step. And that's something that you could build on. For Tyler Atkinson, he commented a little bit on it after the hiring, saying, I can't wait to be coached by Will Muschamp. Will Muschamp's watched Tyler Atkinson's film. For his years at Georgia, I mean, he was an hour and a half from Grayson to Athens. He knew all about the 5-star linebacker that Georgia heavily wanted, right? So now he gets to coach him at Texas in a room that has basically a pretty easy, I don't want to say easy, but, he has a path laid out for him to get on the field very early, and he gets to work with him from day one as a true freshman on the 40 acres in January. So that's exciting for Tyler Atkinson. That's exciting for Anthony Smith. They have to be foaming at the mouth saying, get me Will Muschamp in a room right now, and let's start learning what this defense will look like.
Anthony Smith right now, you mentioned the Hurricane nickname, CJ. He's kind of like that young fireballer pitcher, like an A-ball, who he might throw the 98-mile-an-hour fastball and lead you in strikeouts, but he's probably going to lead you in wild pitches and hit batters too. Like, it's great. You just got to funnel it and get it in the right direction where it's productive. Rod, before we go any further, let's go ahead and thank our sponsor for this edition of On Texas Football. That's our friends over at South Point Dodge.
Yes, sir. Let's thank our friends over at South Point Dodge. There's nothing like Texas football, and nothing runs like a Ram. South Point Dodge is Austin's Ram headquarters, and during the December wrap-up the year sales event, the deals are hotter than ever. So huge sales and huge savings on Ram trucks, Jeep SUVs, plus exclusive perks for all Texas football listeners. 90 days to make your first payment, and they'll ship that new ride to you anywhere in the great state of Texas or beyond. Over 600 vehicles in stock, so whether you need a workhorse or a weekend warrior, they've got you covered. SouthPointDodge.com is where you need to go, or you can go visit them in person off of I-35 in South Austin. Get to the point with our friends at South Point Dodge.
Guys, when we look at the rest of this roster, maybe some guys that didn't play a lot this year, two guys that came to mind. We're talking about Jelani McDonald and Colin Simmons and Tiny Smith. We're talking about disruptors. And Will Muschamp wants disruptors on defense. That's why he convinced Henry Melton to move to defensive line. He was a disruptor. Kick Lamar Houston inside a defensive tackle was a disruptor. Roy Miller was a disruptor. When I think of disruptors, the first two guys that came to mind were Justice Terry. And, obviously it's going to be, how much weight can he gain? What is the size going to be? How many different shades can he play? And no disrespect to Lance Jackson at all, but man, the more I think about Smith the Robo, a year where we didn't think he was going to play, not only did he get on the field, but he got on the field and showed some natural ability to get after the quarterback. Those are two guys that I think about can really benefit from the Will Muschamp hire. Rod, those are kind of my two guys, Justice Terry and Smith the Robo, me and my wild card. Who else you got that you think can really benefit from Will Muschamp hire?
Yes, good question. I mean, I think to me, like you mentioned, I think Lance Jackson actually can benefit tremendously. I mean, guy is position flex, guy can play different gaps up front for you. Is really an athletic freak. So I'd throw him out there. But I think, on the back end, Jonah Williams, if they can ever convince him to focus on football alone, and much like a Jelani McDonald is a guy that you can move around the chessboard. With Jonah Williams' size, the combination of skills and instincts, man, you can do so many different things with that guy. So if you ever convince him to focus on just football, I think he could benefit tremendously. You're also talking about a more aggressive style of defense, and corners who are going to be aggressive corners who can line up and play man and play press when necessary, and are guys who are playmakers. I'll throw out Cade Phillips, and I'll throw out a guy like Smoke Matthews coming in. Young buck. He's a playmaker. He can play press. He can play man. I think much like Cade Phillips, I predicted was going to play this year early as a true freshman, end up starting. I think you can see a similar track for Smoke Matthews in a Muschamp defense. They don't figure out that other corner spot.
Yeah. CJ, I don't know who you got, but I'll throw out another name just because he's a Georgia native, and obviously Will Muschamp's going to be familiar with him. And Sark mentioned Zealous Hicks as a guy that's taking advantage of the bowl practices, that bowl prep. So no matter how you slice it, the guys Rod ran down, you throw Zealous Hicks in there, just a lot of just raw potential in the Texas secondary right now.
I was going to say that exact phrase, a lot of raw talent. How can they be molded? And I'll stick in that secondary. I got two guys, and I'm really interested because we talk about it. Will Muschamp immediately came in and said, hey, safety, secondary, let's see what I can do day one on the job. For me, it's two guys. One we saw at times this year, Xavier Philsamy. What can he do, right? Because he's toolsy as hell. I don't know if there's a safety in this room as quick, as fast, as explosive maybe as Xavier Philsamy, but he's got to get it up top, right? It's the diagnosing of what's in front, reading his keys and reacting, right? It's got to become instinctual for Xavier Philsamy rather than reaction. So that's something for me, because you start looking at who out of Georgia over the last couple of years have had a lot of success. You look at obviously Malachi Starks, but a Dan Jackson, a 7th round pick in 2025. Javon Bullard is a big one for the Packers now. Tyke Smith played a lot of that nickel star spot. So Wardell Mack is another one for me, assuming two things here. One, he stays at Texas, right? There was the report that he was going to enter the portal. He's practiced. He's expected to play in the bowl game. But two, assuming that Grayson Littleton bumps outside cornerback, that's a spot at star that's very important. We know Texas is going to be active in the portal. But if Wardell Mack can become a plus guy for you, now that he's older, now he'll probably have Muschamp in his ear. That's another one. He's shown that he's willing to go up and hit people. Now what can he show in a Will Muschamp level of defense, especially in that secondary tutelage? I think that's another that I'm looking at saying, how high could his ceiling be at Texas? with a new regime coming in.
Yeah. Rod, I mentioned the Sergio Kindle interview that you guys conducted on the Friday live stream, and something that he said in there, and I've heard a couple of guys talk about it. Heard Emmanuel Acho talk about it, and heard Rashad Bobineau talk about it on Coffee and Football. Will Muschamp's going to come in, and everybody's excited about the guys with the raw tools that we talk about he can work with. But all those guys mentioned, hey, not everybody's going to be a fit for Will Muschamp, and he demands a lot of you, but you got to meet him halfway. That's really going to be, Rob, maybe the biggest thing is, hey, yeah, he'll push you, he'll motivate you, but man, if you don't meet him halfway, he's going to move on to the next pretty quick.
Yep. Sergio Kindle basically said that. He was like, everybody's not going to fit that Muschamp blueprint, which is toughness and physicality. He demands a lot. He's really intense, sometimes too intense for guys, right? It doesn't mean you're not a good player. It just mean, hey, maybe not a good fit, maybe not compatible with his coaching style. So it'll be interesting to see, because he's all about toughness, all about physicality, even in the secondary, especially in the secondary. He's a secondary guy. So he don't, some coaches are like, we secondary, man. We don't worry about all that physicality. We ain't trying to bang heads, nothing like that. But he actually is a secondary guy who wants to bang heads. He wants to be physical. So they'll have to have that edge in the secondary too. So it'll be interesting to see what guys feel like, hey, this demanding, intense, physical, tough new regime is for me. And which one decide, nah, you know what? I kind of prefer PK. Not that PK wasn't,
right,
tough or anything, but there's a different level of it with Muschamp. And I think that's obviously what Sark decided, that I want a different level of it. And with PK, it was a bend but don't break. Muschamp is I will break you. I'm going to bend you and break you defense rather than a bend but don't break defense. And the players are the same way.
Yeah, that's actually where I wanted to go for you, Jeff, is we know PK, quieter guy by nature, right? He's not a raw guy on the sideline. Muschamp is, right? What are his most viral clips over the last couple of years? It's death staring someone after making a mistake on the field, right? We know the clip of him and Saban yelling, obviously the whiteboard clip. How does that change the intensity of this defense as we talk about style changing?
Yeah, I think my mind immediately went to when Will Muschamp left Texas, because I look at the defense that he left and the young guys that were on that defense. Yeah, think about Adrian Phillips, Jackson Jeffcoat, Jordan Hicks. Jackson Jeffcoat played a long time in the CFL. The other two guys I mentioned played a really long time in the NFL. And I think those guys going from Will Muschamp, they came to Texas to play for Will Muschamp, and going to Manny Diaz, who was a little more cerebral, a little more reserved. Manny just wasn't, very few people are as fiery as Will Muschamp, and that just wasn't Manny's style. I think those guys, I don't want to say they didn't thrive, but I think there was an adjustment period from what they were expecting and what they kind of how they wanted to be coached to how they were coached. Likewise, some of those guys, Jackson Jeffcoat for one, he all of a sudden thrived playing under Greg Robinson, who was a little more kind of fiery, in your face, kind of more in that Will Muschamp mode. So I think there's going to be both sides of it. I think you'll see guys that could have thrived playing for PK that might not do so under Muschamp. Likewise, there might be some guys that were buried on the depth chart that all of a sudden now they've got roles. The best example I can tell you is, I'll never forget coming out of that spring when we started to hear about, man, Earl Thomas is playing a lot. And we can go revisit his history on Earl, and he's had a Hall of Fame career, but like Earl Thomas was not the guy that when he left Texas, that was not Earl Thomas at the start. And I was like, okay, like the undersized freshman, gonna play him at safety. Oh yeah, we're gonna play Blake Gideon next to him, like a true freshman, like in his first spring. He's supposed to be graduating high school, like he's gonna be your starting safety. Yeah, and guess what? For 2 years, they might have been the best safety tandem in the country. So it's guys of a certain mindset, Rod, that are going to thrive playing for Will Muschamp. So again, those guys that are kind of maybe been buried on the depth chart, they might feel like, hey, I can play for this guy, so let me go ahead and stick it out and see if I can make a move here.
It's exciting stuff.
Yeah. So Rod, any final words just on any guys that we haven't talked about, or just your overall thoughts on Will Muschamp changing not just the defensive culture at Texas, but I think the culture period?
Yeah. I just think it's going to be about aggression, toughness, and physicality. Nothing wrong with what PK did. Nothing wrong with PK's philosophy. There are plenty of ways to skin a cat. That's kind of what we're dealing with here. And Sark prefers the aggression, physicality, and toughness of a Muschamp. And that's ultimately what Kirby Smart called you out about. I think you ask Sark behind closed doors, he still tell you, like, And that had to sit wrong with you when a guy says your guys want checks, but they don't want physicality. And I know he didn't directly say Sark, but it was right after that game. Who the hell else is he talking about? All right. So Muschamp, he's definitely a physicality with the checks guy.
Yeah. And the intensity, again, going back to my question to you, Jeff, I can't be more excited for that. And it's nothing against PK, but when you have both coordinators, both guys on the side of the football where, they're more even keeled, right? It's, hey, I'm going to call this like a chess game rather than a war or a cage fight. That, I think, trickles down to your players where it's, hey, I got to generate or manufacture my own intensity. And I know some folks are sitting there saying, well, they're playing football, man. If you play against Georgia, you got to bring it. If you're playing against Texas A&M or you go to Dallas, you got to generate that. Yeah, but it's also different when you have a guy like a Nansen or a Banks on the sideline jumping up and down, going up top to give you a high five after an interception. But when that comes from your head play caller on one side of the football, I think that resonates a little bit more. And I've told this story since the end of the Florida game, but I left Gainesville saying, dude, that sideline was as dead as I've ever seen.
Yeah.
You need to have someone on that staff that creates intensity from the get-go. And I think that comes with Will Muschamp.
Yeah. The other thing I'll mention, Rod, I only mentioned it because CJ brought it up. He talked about Dallas, the OU game. Sark learned a lot from his first Texas OU game, which was the OU had the big comeback with Caleb Williams, and it ended up being Lincoln Riley's last game. But I'll never forget Will Muschamp, his first tenure at Texas, talking about that 08 game, which was his first. And he said in an interview, I watched an interview he did with Tim Green recently. He said that was maybe the best offense he's ever defended as a defensive coordinator with Sam Bradford and DeMarco Murray and Jermaine Gresham, Trent Williams at left tackle. But he learned a lot. The defense was drastically different in year two. And I just like the fact that you've got now Sark has been really good in rivalry games, and Will Muschamp understands what those rivalry games are all about. I like the fact that you got a couple of guys, your head coach and your defensive coordinator, both can bring the juice and know what those rivalry games are all about.
And those road SEC environments that CJ was talking about, it matters. It's different. And you're about to have a lot of night games. You probably about to have 3-4 of them on the schedule this upcoming year. Arches last year at Tennessee, you got that LSU game. They're gonna be some night games on that schedule for sure.
Muschamp versus Heupel, Muschamp versus Kiffin. Sign me up.
Yep. ESPN is foaming at the mouth to get those things in prime time right now. I'm sure. All right, Rod, CJ, thank you guys for the knowledge and expertise as always. Thank you to Matthew behind the scenes for producing it. Thank you to our friends at South Point Dodge for sponsoring it. If you're not a member over at ontexasfootball.com, that's all right. You can get over to the site right now and sign up using the promo code OTFOG, and that'll get you 1 year of access for just $39.95. Make sure that you like this video and that you're subscribed to the On Texas Football YouTube channel. That way, whether it's here on the channel or on the site, you're not missing any of our Longhorn coverage all year round. For Rod, for CJ, for Matthew, for the entire On Texas Football staff, I'm Jeff Howe. Thank you so much for watching and listening. And until next time, hook 'em.
Hook 'em.